Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca, and today I'm going to be bringing you a hopefully comprehensive guide to my favourite author, Sarah J. Maas. I don't want to dwell on this too long because it's unnecessary to this video, but I have been sick this week. I am feeling a lot better now. I'm definitely out of the wars. However, I have noticed when I've been filming vlog updates this week that you can tell with my voice that I am very nasally and I don't sound like I normally do. So I just had a cold at the start of the week. It's clearing up, but I do sound a little bit weird and my nose is very crusty. So I just wanted to address that. So this video has been a long time coming. The most common question that I get across all of my channel is, where should I start with Sarah J. Maas? Now, I started reading Sarah J. Maas back in 2015, I believe. It was the year that A Court of Thorns and Roses was released, and from there I went back and read all of the Throne of Glass books up to date, and then I continued as the books were published up until the present day, 2020. So at that moment in time, when I first started reading Sarah J. Maas, I believe that she had 6 books out in total. Now, in 2020, she has a total of 14 books, so knowing where to start with her work can be very confusing, especially as she is quite a polarizing author, and it is not uncommon for you to see people trashing her all over the internet. So in this video, I'm aiming to do quite a few things. The first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about Sarah J. Maas overall, because she does write very similar stories. She has a lot of similar themes running through all of her books, and there are a lot of similar elements in there. I'm then going to be running through all of her series, telling you a little bit about each series. I'm going to do this very briefly, otherwise we're going to be here all day, and I'm also going to be telling you guys which one is my personal favorite book in each series. After that, I will then advise you where I think you should start reading her books and what my advised reading order is. Now, the reason that I'm going to run through her books and her series before this is because you guys know your reading tastes more than I know them. So if you think that a different series than the one that I'm recommending you start with would be a better fit for you, then by all means you should definitely go ahead and read that one instead. And then after that, I guess if I have anything else to add, then I will touch upon that right at the end. As usual, you guys know me and completely winging this video because that's just how I do things. Okay, so Sarah J. Maas as a whole, she currently has 14 published books across 3 series, and then she also has a kind of standalone that fits into another series that is written by a whole bunch of different authors. At this moment in time, I have read every single one of the 14 books that she has published, and I have read 8 of them more than once, so I would like to think I know quite a bit about her books. I am a huge fan. You guys know, especially over the last few months, how much I love Sarah J. Maas. I've been Maas trash ever since I read A Court of Thorns and Roses. I was quite quiet about it in 2019, which is why a few of you guys may not know the extent of my obsession and love for this woman, and that is simply because she had no books coming out in 2019, so I didn't really have too much of a reason to scream about her. But if you guys have been watching my vlogs, you know how much I love her. So her works all have one thing in common, and that is an epic love story. She is a fantasy romance author, and as I said, it is quite common for you to find people trashing her on the internet, and I personally believe that quite a few of these criticisms come from people who don't like fantasy romance. Now, this is the fault of the publishing industry because they placed her into the young adult market when she really should have been new adult to start off with as a young adult fantasy author. And when Throne of Glass started, that was fine because the first few books in the Throne of Glass series, as we will discuss soon, are typical young adult fantasy. However, as her series went on, it became more and more obvious that Sarah J. Maas is solidly fantasy romance with sex, epic love stories. The focuses of her books, I would say, are pretty much equal fantasy and romance. Now, the thing that I particularly love about Sarah J. Maas that I have not yet found with any other author is not only does she write characters exceptionally well, so she writes a very compelling romance, but her fantasy elements are also outstanding. People are going to get very mad at me about this, but she does something that I would compare to George R.R. Martin. Don't get mad, please let me explain. George R.R. Martin is very well known for writing very complex worlds where everything is relevant, and Sarah J. Maas does the same. I will admit, not to the same extent as George R.R. Martin. Everything that she writes in her books will become relevant very later on. In the Throne of Glass series, we do see that in a prequel set of novellas that were published way before the end books of the series were, have a whole ton of characters and scenarios that are very much relevant to the end game of this series, and I really love how everything just weaves together seamlessly like that, and that her stories seem to be plotted out so so far in advance that she can bring all of these elements that she wrote many years ago into the story where she's currently working on it. Now I know I've talked about the romance, but Sarah J Maas just generally writes characters excellently. Some of my favourite groups of characters in the whole world are the 13, the Cadre and the Inner Circle, which are all large friendship groups that are contained within her series. She also writes familial relationships very well, whether that is between bickering sisters, whether that is between the guilt and duty you feel towards deceased parents. I find everything that she writes regarding her characters, their emotions and their relationships impeccable. She is not known for her diversity. There is always a lot of complaints and discourse surrounding the amount of representation she includes in her books. However, throughout all of her series, she has included characters of colour and LGBT characters. Now, I'm not going to speculate on whether the representation is good or not because I cannot speak for any of those groups. All I can say is that they are definitely there on the page, and I can't really give an opinion on their treatment throughout the books. But one thing that Sarah J Maas does do really well, in my opinion, is writes mental health and trauma representation excellently. Throughout all of her series, there is a theme of mental health somewhere. The Throne of Glass series deals with depression in parts. The Court of Thorns and Roses series has PTSD representation in it, and her new book, Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, both characters are dealing with a lot of trauma, and a very large portion of that book really goes into detail about the psychological scars that affected characters have faced in the wake of such trauma. So if you like very character-driven books, if you like romance in books, then I think that you will really like Sarah J Maas. If you don't like romance in books, if you like your fantasy without any romance at all, then I would strongly advise that you don't even really try to read her books because romance is very much a central theme. Sarah also has a very particular voice in her writing. You can tell if a book is written by her, and I do know a lot of people find this irritating. She can be a little bit repetitive, she can be a little bit heavy-handed with the metaphor. I personally love her writing style. It is not for everybody, and that is something that you can only really judge for yourself when you sit down, read one of her books and see what you think about it. So I think that covers all of the general themes in her work. Now let's move on to her individual series. So the first one I'm just going to touch upon briefly, and I'm pretty much not going to address it throughout the rest of this video, but that one is Catwoman Soul Stealer. This is the third book in the DC Icons series, which is a young adult series that follows different DC superheroes, where each book is written by a different young adult author. Sarah J Maas wrote the Catwoman one, and this one follows Selena Kyle as she is becoming Catwoman and wreaking havoc on Gotham City alongside Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. Now I gave this one 4 stars. I did enjoy it, but it is definitely not her best work, and I would not really recommend that you start here. I would probably only recommend reading this book if you are reading the DC Icons series anyway, so you need to read it to read that series, or if you are a really big fan of Sarah J Maas and you have read everything else that she's written and you want a little bit more from her. It has a lot of her central themes in here. You can tell that it is Sarah J Maas, but you can also feel how constrained it is because she's writing in a pre-existing world that she did not create, and so I would say that it is in no way a good representation of her work or anywhere near as good as any of her other books. So starting off with her first published series, which was Throne of Glass. This is a young adult fantasy that follows an assassin called Selena Sardothian, who is enslaved in the salt mines of Endovia when she is pulled out of there by the prince and the captain of his guard, as they want her to be their champion in a series of upcoming trials that are being held at the palace to pick the king's champion, who is going to be the person responsible for assassinating whoever the hell the king wants murdered. Selena enters into these trials, and the first book does follow those trials. So this is an 8-book series. The first book is Throne of Glass. There is also a set of prequel novellas called Assassin's Blade. This follows Selena during her time as a Darlan's assassin before she was enslaved and put into the salt mines. This is set before the start of the series, but I recommend that you read Throne of Glass first and then you read this one, because I think that the context from reading Throne of Glass really helps you with understanding what's going on here. We then have Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire. Then her books start to get really chunky with Queen of Shadows. My personal favourite book in the series is Empire of Storms. This book has the introduction of one of my favourite characters in the series, which is Lorcan. We then have a novella from the perspective of Chaol, who is the captain of the guard that is in this entire series, and that is Tower of Dawn. This takes place on a separate continent. You do not 100% have to read this book if you don't want to. I know a lot of people were very much put off by it. It isn't my favourite in the series, but you do find out one piece of crucial information in this book, and you are also introduced introduced to a couple of the main players for the resolution of the series. And then the final book, which is the one that made me cry the hardest out of any book I've ever read, Kingdom of Ash, which is 1,000 pages long. This one is, she's chunky, she's thick. So while this series does have strong fantasy romance elements, I would say that the beginning of this series is pretty much young adult fantasy, and I would say that it is her most popular series, maybe, even if it's not her best one. Moving into full fantasy romance territory, we then had A Court of Thorns and Roses. This one is a retelling of not only Beauty and the Beast, but also Tamlin. This is where the fairies really started coming out to play. Sarah J Maas is my queen of the fae. That rhymed. Oh, I'm writing another song about Sarah J Maas, who figured? So in this one, we follow Feyre Archeron, who is very poor, and when she is hunting for food for her family one winter, she kills a fae that is in disguise as a wolf without really knowing that he is a fae, and because of this, the High Lord of Spring comes to her home and drags her away from the human world to the world of fairy, where she must live out the rest of her life in place of the fae life that she took. So this was my favourite book of all time when I read it. However, the sequel to that one is A Court of Mist and Fury, which was my favourite book of all time for a very long time. I'm sure you guys have heard a little bit about this. This is the best book in existence, or definitely one of them, and we have some really raunchy stuff in here. The final book in that series is A Court of Wings and Ruin, which disappointed a lot of people. Have to admit, I would have to reread this to give you a solid answer on whether it is disappointing, because at the time I read it, I loved it, I found nothing wrong with it, but everybody else thought it was disappointing. And then the book that everybody wishes was never published is, of course, A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is a novella that is designed to bridge the gap between the end of the ACOTAR series and the beginning of the new ACOTAR series, which will follow different characters. I would say that you don't need to read this if you don't want to, because it doesn't actually really bridge the gap. It just tells you which characters the next trilogy is going to be about, and this is mainly about having sex in the sky, doing Christmas shopping. But I do suppose it does have a little bit of substance, because there is quite a little bit of talk in here about Feyre recovering from some of the events of the past few books. And to be honest, if you've made it through the rest of her books, or you've made it through the ACOTAR series, you may as well read this one, because it's only 200 pages. And then the final book, the one that she most recently published, is my new favourite book of all time, is her adult debut, and that is House of Earth and Blood, the first book in the Crescent City series. In this one, we follow half-fae Bryce Quinlan, who is best friends with a wolf shifter called Danica Fendir. At the beginning of this story, a man is about to get out of jail that Danica busted a couple of years ago for manufacturing bombs to be used in terrorist attacks. As a result of this man's release, there is a huge event in this book that is a catalyst for a whole ton of events to come, which includes Bryce being called in by the Archangel Micah to investigate a series of murders, and because it is expected that she will be in quite a bit of danger while she does this, she is assigned a personal bodyguard in the form of fallen angel Hunt Athalar. This one is very sexy. There's not as much smut as I would like in it, but this one definitely has a lot of emotional impact. I would say that this is as emotionally impactful as the last book in a series, and this is only book one. The characters are very well done. There are a lot of very strong relationships in here. This is Sarah J Maas at her finest. All of the relationships and all of the characters are 100% on point, and this, I would say, is definitely her best work to date. Okay, so where should you start with Sarah J Maas? Now, with starting any of her series, there is definitely scope for you to give up, but I would definitely recommend that your first book be A Court of Thorns and Roses. This book works really well as a standalone on its own. I know a lot of people don't like this book and they really like A Court of Mist and Fury, but I personally really like this book. I kind of treat this book as a standalone, because another recurring theme in Sarah J Maas is that the series will change pace and change direction when you don't expect it to, and this first book definitely has a very different tone to the other two books in the series. So I would definitely recommend that you start with the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and even if you do not like this book, please make sure that you read A Court of Mist and Fury, because pretty much everybody loves that book, and this one can be a little bit hit or miss. After you've read A Court of Thorns and Roses, if you would like to continue with Sarah J Maas, I would recommend you then pick up House of Earth and Blood. This is the next step up from A Court of Mist and Fury. This is that, but a little bit more adult. I mean, A Court of Mist and Fury is pretty much new adult anyway, but this is solidly new adult. Now, I would possibly recommend this as a starting point for Sarah J Maas if you want to be hooked immediately. My only issue with recommending that you read this first is you're only going downhill from here if you start with this one. So depending on what kind of reader you are, you may want to start with this. I think that this one will steal your heart. This one is just generally so damn good. But if you are somebody who doesn't want to be reading her best work first, read this after the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. Now, after that, if you are hooked on Sarah J Maas and you now need to read everything that she has ever published, then I would recommend that you go in with Throne of Glass. Do not start with Throne of Glass unless you are somebody who will not give up on a series like I am. If I start a series, even if I don't love it, I will still continue and read the rest of the books. Now, the reason that I say that is that for me personally, Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, and Heir of Fire are just not that good. They are a very different tone. The first two books definitely are a very different tone to the rest of the series. Heir of Fire, I really didn't like the first time I read it because this is a filler book that is used to bridge these two books with the rest of the series. Upon reread, I appreciated Heir of Fire a lot more because I really enjoyed the character development in here, but first read through, these ones just weren't as good. The first book especially, I would say, is objectively just not that good. That being said, there are definitely two types of readers when it comes to this series. There are the people that love these three books and hate the rest of the series, and then there are people like me who love these three books and don't really like the start of this series. Regardless, if you are like me, the first half of this series is going to be a little bit of a drag because I think that pretty much across all Sarah J Maas's books, the first 100 to 200 pages can be quite dense and quite slow, and they are definitely a struggle to get through if you are not that invested. So I would definitely recommend going with Throne of Glass last, unless you are determined and stubborn as hell like me, and you will persevere and read the entire thing regardless. Now, what I want you to bear in mind with all of Sarah J Maas's books is, like I said, you have that period of slowness at the beginning of every single book, but the payoff is worth it because by the time you get to the end of most of these books, and definitely by the end of the series, you will be willing to rip your heart out of your own chest for these characters. And the reason for that is because all of those slow moments that you thought were boring and you thought were a slog are actually developing stronger connections between you and the characters. So by the time you get to the end of the series, you really want to die. I personally believe that Sarah J Maas's books are worth it. I really love the emotional connection that I am able to build with all of these characters. All of her series, especially the Throne of Glass series, has a very large cast of characters, but I love all of them. Sarah J Maas is a master at manipulating emotions. She is going to make you fall in love with characters in one book and then completely change your opinions on them in the sequels. She is similarly going to be introducing villains and antagonists that you absolutely despise, and then will turn it around and they will be your favorite characters. So I definitely think that her books are worth it. I think that the emotional payoff from reading her books is definitely worth it. I am an extreme case in that I am really into her books. I see some of the flaws, I see some of the issues that people have with them, but that does not affect my enjoyment, and I am like ride or die for this woman. I will read absolutely anything that she publishes. But I would definitely say that the strength in her books is, as I have mentioned, the characters, and also that she just takes you on this journey that is so well crafted. Even if it's not well written, I think her stories are very well crafted to the point where you get to the end of her series and you feel like you've lived it. And I definitely think that that is a very powerful thing in a book that we don't come across often, and that is why she's my favorite author, because I see something special in her books that I struggle to find in any other books. But I think that is all I have to say on the topic of Sarah J Maas. I'm pretty sure when I'm editing this I will come across something that I probably should have said, but at this minute that is all I can think of. So please let me know if you have never read Sarah J Maas before. Let me know if this video was helpful. Let me know where you are going to start with her if you want to start with her. Please also do not hesitate to ask me any Sarah J Maas related questions in my comments. I will try to answer them. I am honestly terrible at responding to my comments, but I will try to keep an eye out for these and answer your questions. But aside from that, I think that that is all for this video. So please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
about your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.